Okay. Hi, Ashley.
Hey.
So I want to start the meeting off that I really enjoy being in your classroom today. I kind of want to start off the meeting. I really like the idea of your lesson, but can you give me a little bit more background on like the purpose, where you were going with it, that kind of thing? What was your intentions from that lesson?
So I think that this may be one of the first times that we've like really dug into doing STAR practice, because I try not to do too much STAR focused stuff, because I think a lot of it they get information from the things that we do regularly. But because they have STAR next week, I kind of wanted them to dig into a passage and pull their answers out and then go through it as a class together. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more engaging by breaking them up into groups and teams. And we did Harry Potter houses, even though not all of them are into Harry Potter, but it's just easy that way. And so that kind of puts some competition behind it instead of them just feeling like they're answering all these multiple choice questions for no reason. And I don't think you were here for this part, but we did go through all of the answers, and I was letting them get extra points for explaining answers and being able to kind of defend what they chose. So that's what we were focused on today.
When you did the packet that y'all were working with, how did y'all do that did y'all work on it on Thursday?
Yes, so on Thursday we started with something where they were giving peer review over something that we had just completed, and then the second half of the class was working on that packet, and that's why I had to give them a little bit of extra time when you first walked in, because they didn't have time to finish the day before.
Okay, and then when I walked in, you were a little nervous. You said this could go well and you could not, so how do you feel it went?
I think it went probably even better than I expected it to. I don't do well with, in my mind, I don't do well with changing like what we're our focus multiple times throughout the class. I think that was the first time I did it all day because that's my first class, but throughout the class periods, I felt like it became smoother, and I was like, okay, let's move this to here so that I can make sure that as we transition, it's going more seamlessly instead of giving them a lot of breaks to where they pick up their phone or they change their focus and things like that. So I do think that in second period is probably a little bit more choppy than it was the rest of the day. But I think that during that section, during that class period, it still went, if that makes sense. But I do get a little nervous whenever we're transitioning multiple times within one class.
Right. Okay, so that's where that 5 minutes came from, that they were just doing a warm-up. I really liked how you were managing their time, giving them a few minutes, because they are freshmen and they were a little squirrely.
Yes.
And you manage them very well. So this was the question I had. You went through and you put them in groups by Harry Potter, which you're right, some of them didn't know, but they still thought it was funny. And there was the side conversations about what groups they were in, and they were laughing about it, so I think it was something good. Would you consider doing it differently next year? And if so, how would you do it differently?
I think all of my classes were in a little bit of a different position today because I was with half of my classes on Thursday and then not with half of them. So I was trying to balance how far we were all going to get. So in some classes, I was able to play like trash get ball with some of them. And with some classes, like second period, who needed to finish things, we weren't able to do some of the activities that we had. I do think I would probably do it a little bit differently, like maybe introducing like maybe the groups before they start the whole thing. But the reason I didn't was because of some of my kids getting me in class and some of them having a sub on Thursday.
Okay, so my suggestion, and you might going to do this in the next few weeks, but I felt like they were really excited about the groups, and then all they were able to do was input their scores. So what about going ahead and putting them in groups and letting them kind of work towards those answers just to kind of double check themselves and then answer?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to do is first we want them to try to come up with their own answers just so that they're challenging their own brain, because we do have some students who will like automatically pull and decide like, oh, the smartest person in my group, I'm going to just take their answers because I know they got them right.
Got it.
So that's why we're having them input their own answers first. And then what I was able to do in like third and fourth period was have them go to their teams, and then they formulated one answer all together, and they were pulling that answer, and then every group that got it right sent one person up to do the trash get ball.
So how did you feel with that happening in fourth period and then what I witnessed in second period? Which do you feel worked better?
I definitely think that it works well, like the way you're saying. I do like when they come together to come up with their answers as a group. The only thing is I like for them to work through it first on their own.
For sure. That's what I meant though, is that they worked for it on Friday and they did a little bit today. And then I understand that you don't want them to use their answers because it is competition. Are you tallying points?
Yes.
Okay.
So they're getting like house points right now.
So then maybe in second, where after they tally the points, that would have been the time to go ahead and break out.
Yeah, I think that's
and
a
go
good
through
idea.
each one.
Yeah.
And go from there. Okay, so then let's look at the rigor and relevance rubric. Let's work with rigor.
Okay.
So where do you feel like that lesson that I observed fell on this rubric?
I definitely think we were probably closer to the left side, maybe more beginning or emerging, because they were really just working on their own. There wasn't like a whole lot of discussion at that point, and I think it was more. Well, let me look at this. I would say emerging because it says completing tasks that require comprehension because they're reading and answering questions. But I wouldn't say it was like the part that you were in, I wouldn't say it was like they're creating and designing and things like that, which would be well developed. So I would have probably put it at, I think, emerging.
I kind of hit between beginning and emerging.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Beginning just because the part that I saw, you were just kind of going through the questions together, and so we only had like one person answering. And the little girl that was sitting over there, her answer was very insightful. You can tell that you had done it before,
but not everybody.
Was having.
I agree with that.
So it would have been kind of cool to have them in their groups. She would have shared that information and maybe kind of built up a little bit more conversation, and then being able to answer to the class. But then where, like you were saying, where you went fourth period, that would be more emerging. Because they are it's a little bit more student centered. Right. And it kind of gives other students the opportunity to respond and not just, those little
I agree with that.
Pockets of that. So as far as the relevance, pretty much I don't think it falls much different. Do you think you did any difference as far as relevance?
No, I think that with the kind of lessons we're doing right now, we're not really pulling like current world day things for that. I mean, the relevance is that they're taking STAR tests next week.
Right,
so
next week.
That's probably the most relevant thing about this one, yeah. So I would probably put it at the beginning in that area too.
And so it's just some of the things I noted. Like I said, students were excited about the teams. I thought it was funny. Like there was like, what the heck's a Hufflepuff?
Yeah, Hufflepuff.
And they started looking out, and I thought that was really neat. And so and I know it must have been just for second period, but I felt like you went through all this trouble to put them in teams, and then they didn't even get to work for their teams.
I agree.
So that would be the only thing on reflection. But I thought it was a very creative way to review for STAR, because let's face it, they don't want to review for STAR, and it's boring, and you have to, you have to get through these lessons, and just having them practice over and over, it gets a little boring. And I thought it was really cool that the kids were eager to participate. Even the one you had, they were excited. They were calling it out. And everything else. So let's just did you talk any on Thursday about like why y'all were doing these houses?
Yes. Okay. So on Thursday we kind of introduced like, hey, we know that y'all don't love STAR test, and we know that, I mean, and a lot of my kids they're gonna pass, but I'm trying to get them from passing to like mastering. Like I don't want them to just settle for what they can easily do. And I kind of preface like, this might not be our favorite part, but we're going to try to make some competition, and I'm going to buy prizes and things like that. So my kids will buy easily into a competition because they're a very competitive group. And so we did kind of go over like practicing STAR, because I've never believed that English is really easy to study for. I mean, unless like you're reading a novel and things like that. So I just told them like the best way for us to practice for English is, or even study for English, is to go through STAR questions and get used to answering them and learning how to narrow down answer choices and picking the best one and things like that. So they knew why they were getting in groups, because I was trying to make it a competition, and they know that. And then they knew that we're just going to try to practice to multiple choice, and then we're going to go into writing, expository and things like that for a few days. So I did go over that, but maybe that's something I should have like reiterated. Like, hey, remember, this is what we're doing it for. This is what we're going over. I think that would have been beneficial.
All right. Let's go to the last question. So when you guys were teaming and deciding to do this, did you work off of any data or anything to decide what you were going to do?
We used the interim STAR that they took, and then I basically blocked them off by like and some of the teachers did this and not all of us did, but we took their star scores and then we put them in kind of like categories, which I feel like that's a basic way to categorize them. But anyone who made below a certain score would have been like red, and then we split reds up into 4 teams. So they all have very similar dynamics of really high scores, really low scores in between. And I really had to tell my students that because they were seeing some of the people that were in their team and they're like, wait a second, is this the dumb or the smart team? Like what team is this?
So you were very strategic when you were dividing into houses?
Yes. So there's like really high scores, like people who got perfect scores. There's like 2 or 3 of each of those in every group. So we tried to make sure that we're making it fair because if you put all the low scores in one team, then they're going to be nowhere near in points than the other ones. And now when you're looking at the scores, like most of the teams are like 1 or 2 points away. So that'll keep it competitive. So
okay. Well, keep that in mind as you're going on it, as they're working together. Now that you separated in a group, that's an opportunity for those lower kids to hear those
exactly.
more kids. All right. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Very good. Pause it. Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
I want to start off that I really enjoyed observing your class today. I kind of want to hear from you first, though, and kind of what led to today's lessons and what were your goals from that lesson today.
So leading up today, we've read I think three other short stories that are the Gothic horror genre, and we're reading them to gear up to get the kids to be writing their own version of a horror story. And we've been focusing on things like characterization, setting, plot, theme, with all of those skills ultimately going to come out in their own story. So leading up to today, we've done that a little bit, and today's main focus was just to focus on that characterization of the story, to try to get them to think about how does the author use the characters and create the characters to develop suspense.
And so how do you feel it went?
Not well. I feel like it was a very rough lesson, and it did not really go the way that I envisioned it in my head.
All right, so how did you envision it going in your head?
Well, doing like the kind of read aloud model where I'm reading and writing things up on the board, I envisioned more like an interaction with them. Especially I felt like the story was going to be more of like more interest to them. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I would get more feedback whenever I was like asking them questions. But it just kind of seemed like I would ask questions and then I was just like hitting a wall. Like I wasn't getting anything back from them. So that was definitely not how I thought it was going to go.
Did you make any adjustments as you progressed throughout the day, or do you think it was just that group of kids?
Well, I mean, I don't want to blame it all on the kids, but I think that like throughout the other parts of the day is I let them read through the story on their own. And then I was able to have conversations with them, and I don't know why it seemed like it worked better that way, mm-hmm. like letting them read on their own instead of me going through it with them. And I don't know if that's like, I guess it's different, like at the junior level with my freshmen, I feel like the read aloud model works better. But then at the junior level, I can see, like, it just seems like whenever they're reading it on their own, then they are more connected to it for some reason.
Well, that's interesting that you said that because I did make a note here that said, 20 minutes to read aloud.
Yeah.
And so I asked, like, how can you break this up to maintain attention span?
Right.
Because I did notice that you were losing kind of like, just kind of that this little part of the class over here. You lost their attention where at first they were a little rowdy and everything else, but as you started reading and the story started progressing, because it was an interesting story,
right?
You kind of captured their attention, but I do think you lost them a little bit by reading the whole time.
I think so too, yeah.
And so I did mention that, like, how do you break that up? And so I really like how you asked the question of because of this detail, like, what can you assume? Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was really good questioning. When I left here, they were doing questions on Canvas. Were they doing that independently?
Independently.
Group?
Yes.
So in reflection, like, if you were able to do this next year, how do you think you could break it up to make it a little bit more student-centered and take the focus and the work off of you?
Yeah.
Because, girl, you were working hard.
And
so I want you to do less work and put more of the responsibility on them. How do you think you could do that?
I think, like, if I were to do it again, I would probably, like, in their groups, have each of the group focus on one part of the story, looking for a specific thing, and then have them, like, talk to or teach the class what did they see, and then how did it help like establish the plot and the theme through characterization. So I think it would be more of them breaking down like their own little section of the story, possibly, or even the whole story, depending on like the time and the amount of kids that I had. But I think definitely having them do that part of the work would be better.
And even like, because we have the opportunity for the interactive boards.
Yeah.
Maybe they could come up and
Yeah, true.
kind of handle and write on that as well.
Yes.
Even though it's a little awkward for the kids.
Yeah. It makes me nervous. I'm like, don't break it.
Did the questions have anything to do with? What were the questions like towards the story, or is it helping them start preparing for that engaging story that they are going to have to write?
So it was a little bit of both. So the questions asked how how the characters. I'm trying to think of the wording. It asked something about how the characterization helped develop the plot, and so that was a lot about the point that we wanted to reiterate. Just because whenever we get them to write their own story, we want them to be able to develop characters that like align with where their story is going.
Mm.
Yeah. So we did have like some questions were like along those lines.
Okay. I really do like how when it comes to the objective, it's on the board and you verbally established it, but then before you read it again, you established that as well. That was really clear. I don't always see that when I go into to classrooms, and I thought that was a really good. And I have to admit, because I've observed you on multiple occasions in the last couple of years, you're managing them a lot better.
Thank you.
As well. Like that, I mean, that really was a tough crowd.
Yeah.
I think us as English teachers, we have to work towards, like, how do we make this valuable to them?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get the buy-in? Like, how do you try to make this relatable to them?
That's a good question. So like the whole, I guess like relevance. I think with this, it's you think that like because it's like horror stuff, they already will have like an interest in it naturally. So I feel like that helps in this situation a little bit. But I can totally see how getting them, like, okay, well, we're going to read a story and we're going to answer these questions about it. There is going to be that potential like pushback just because they don't want to do that. So that's a good thought is how do you get the buy-in for that? And I think that's something that I'm working on. And I think, it has a lot to do with just like the relationships that you have with the kids. And like if you, and I don't necessarily want them to do it because they know I want them to. Like I want them to be into it.
Right.
So that's something that I think is kind of like an ongoing battle that we face is like how do we get them to buy into stuff, not just because we want them to do it, but because we want,
Right.
they should be into it.
I think it's got to work towards, working on how are these skills going to help me in the future? Because you got to think it too, especially in an on-level junior classroom. They're already starting like looking for the future.
Yeah.
What do I want to do? So how does writing an engaging story
Yeah,
help with
very
that?
true.
But I mean, so at one point in the lesson, you did do like I said you presented a scenario that was relatable. So I thought that was neat. And you did get a reaction from them. So I think that's where you pulled in the rest. So you were working towards making it relatable.
Yeah.
I just think we need to work on the work a little bit, maybe the question and answering. So I think what you were talking about earlier about chunking it and making them responsible, maybe that is where they're going to take ownership because, they're responsible for it and it's just not you running the class.
True. And I've done that with other lessons and it works. Like it really works well. So I don't really know why I didn't think of doing that with this.
Well, and you can see too, because I've put students want to engage. However, only a few are having an opportunity to engage. But oddly, they are interacting with the text.
Yeah.
But it was just this. So, what factors? What like external factors are challenged in that level of classroom that enabled today to go successfully? What do you think they were?
For it to go successfully,
or the way you wanted it to?
Yeah.
Not that it wasn't successful.
Let's see. I think that the kids like they do want to pay attention and they want to know what's going on. So just and like the kids we have here, like they're good kids. They're gonna do what they need to do and like take care of their business. So that's a part. I feel like that's like half the battle. So we're kind of lucky in a way here that we have the kids that like want to just do their stuff naturally. But I think also just I don't know if it's maybe like telling them like, hey, this is all gonna help you with this big thing you have to do, kind of like letting them know where we're going and what the purpose of it all is. Like I know like you said something about how I mentioned to them like why we're doing it. And because I feel like anytime we're reading something, if I give them a purpose for why we're doing it, then that helps them because at least they can like be looking for that one thing while we're reading. So I feel like that helps. But I mean, besides just the kids like wanting to do well, just naturally. I don't know.
Do you think maybe chunking pairing up the stories and the skills that you're teaching with this, with the engaging story at the same time. So they could be reading and they're looking for, like today was characterization and setting.
Yeah.
And then they could come back and think about characterization and setting in their own paper. Do you think that would be a little bit better?
Yeah,
Would that
probably.
work?
So, yeah, because then it would be we're modeling and showing them the skill that we want them to use, and then they're going to be applying it to their own. So that's definitely like a good, like that's what we want them to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
And maybe it's that constant revision. How did you do it? Can you mimic, the setting in this or
definitely.
anything like that? I think that might be a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. So let's look at the rigor and relevance. Let's just look at the rigor side.
Okay.
So where do you feel that your lesson hit on the rigor and relevance?
For that particular lesson, probably we're like in the beginning stage with that one, just because I wasn't getting out of them like the questioning that I wanted. I wasn't getting out of them like just like the higher level thinking that I wanted them to get to. So I feel like it was like I knew where I wanted them to go, but I didn't get them there in that lesson. Yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah,
that it is because it's the student discussion was driven by you, and the student discussion was focusing on a variety of topics, but it was that were offering it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if this was the third short story that you were doing, we should have moved beyond the beginning into emerging.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I always write the 2 positives and a suggestion. So my 2 positives were you were working hard and you were trying so hard to get their attention. Like you could see your teaching qualities coming out. It wasn't there was just a disconnect.
Yeah.
Not so much a disconnect between you and your students, just the content is what I saw.
Yeah.
And then I really liked the questioning. I felt like it was really quality. And then the only thing is the reflection was how could you work through the short story in order to engage the class and you not read it to them.
Yeah.
So that was my only reflection that we already talked about.
Yeah, I think that would, if I were to do it again, I would definitely do it differently. Yeah, just like I did with my other classes, just adapting it and saying like, okay, well that didn't work, so we're gonna try something else instead.
Well, and that's promising too that you tweaked it for the rest of the day because that's what we have to do. First time run, you never know.
True. True.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.